So for everyone who's just logged in, welcome. Thanks a lot for joining us. I'll just give everybody an extra minute or two as we seem to have a little bit of slow technology at the moment. If just a reminder, I'll repeat this again, just grand to have everybody joining us. But if you have any questions, put them into the Q&A, not the chat. We'll get to them. We already have 4 really great questions that came in earlier that I have kind of massaged to be generic for everyone. So I think we'll have a really great list of questions that comes out of this. And I want to admit up front, and Veronica and I have talked about this, we do not have the answers to all of your questions. So there's a little bit of ambiguity around what's going to open, how it's going to open, what's going to be permitted. And that's going to be a matter of monitoring closely every day and posting updates and notices for everyone. So, and again, thanks so much for joining us today. We'll get started in 1 minute. Okay, Veronica, I'm ready to go. You're all good to go?
I'm all good to go.
Excellent, thanks so much. So Veronica Franco, who is a lawyer with Clark Wilson, is joining us today. I'm Tony Giaventa, the Executive Director of CHOA. We are going to do our best to try and give you updates around the openings and the impact of the openings and the orders around the COVID-19 limitations. Again, if you have any questions, put them into the Q&A. BMS, Plumbing and Mechanical, are our sponsors this week. Very grateful for that. There's a schedule now posted on the website of all of the webinars that go into the end of September. And we may have additional sessions posted that come up with respects to updates as we move along through the summer. So watch the schedule closely. We do record these webinars. They are posted to our YouTube channel, so you will be able to view them. The rest of your council members will be able to view them and share them. Please submit your questions through Q&A. You cannot hear or see each other. This is a webinar, so only Veronica and I will have audio and we'll have camera visual to be able to respond back to you. So as a result of this being recorded, please remember to protect personal information. Don't identify your strata plan, your business, or your name as we go through this, as the session is recorded. And we do try to hold questions to the end of the presentation, but if it is topical and it comes up throughout the presentation, we will be able to engage in that way. We've also included our email addresses, so if you have additional information or require additional information, just pop us an email and we'll try and get back to you in a few days. But usually after these sessions, we're so swamped, it's going to take up to a week to get back to you. So the BC Restart Plan, and what does it mean? So we're going to basically focus on the things that really matter to strata corporations here. And as you know, the Restart Plan is in 4 phases. Each one of them will require an announcement and an order as they change and move forward. So we're going to talk about gatherings for meetings. We're going to go into facility use and management, building services and operations, the use of common areas, and try and give you some sense of what a safety plan is, because a safety plan is referred to through most of the orders as we go through. This is just a little bit of a disclaimer up front, but I think this is a really healthy way of looking at this. Not all of the implications of the Restart Plan are clearly defined, and they probably won't be known until each of the phases comes into effect. The recommendation is best practices, and it's there for the protection of everyone who interacts with your strata, either as an occupant, a visitor, an employee, inspectors, delivery personnel. And remember that not everyone has been vaccinated, and the risk of transmission continues, especially with variants. So the objective here is to prevent the spread of the virus. And the measures that we maintain within our communities help to reduce the risk of exposure and transmission. So in addition to the restart recommendations, just a really important thing to remember, and this applies to strata managers, it applies to caretakers, building staff, contractors, service personnel, WorkSafe regulations do apply. And it does require that under WorkSafe that you actually have things like safety plans and reports and monitoring of how business is conducted within your communities. So, even though you're a strata corporation of 12 units, the same conditions are still going to apply if you have employees and contractors that are on your site that are doing things. So it's important to remember that in addition to the layer of COVID and the restrictions, WorkSafe is still on top of there. So Veronica, I'll let you take it over for a while.
Okay. So many of the openings for gathering you'll see require a safety plan for whether you're doing formal business activities or meetings or even things like operating your amenities, for example. So what you need to know is that the safety plan has to be published, and it must be available to anybody who's attending. So they are entitled to ask for it and receive a copy of it. And what the safety plan entails is figuring out how people enter, what the capacity is like, how you're going to deal with social distancing, how you're dealing with contact tracing and attendance, what sort of sanitation you're going to apply, what the sanitation procedures are during the meeting, what the protocols are for wearing a mask, etc. So it's really everything that you need to think about in order to ensure that you maintain those best practices that Tony was talking about earlier. And the idea is, for example, when you read what's required for more formal business meetings and into the future, for example, is that these meetings require you to ensure social distancing by making them seated. So you're not standing around, for example, in a parkade. You actually have chairs where people sit, and their chairs will be exactly the right amount of distance, the 2 meters that are necessary. So in essence, whenever you're thinking about what either organized activity or business activity or meeting that you're planning to do, it actually requires a lot of planning and a lot of pre-thinking to make sure that you've taken care of all aspects of the safety plan. In addition to the safety plan, so that's just required for anybody who's hosting meetings, for example, the Strata Corporation also has to comply with WorkSafe regulations that apply to employees and contractors. So keeping in mind that for many people that you bring on site to do work, or your caretakers and your concierges, the Strata Corporation itself is a workplace and a work site. And so therefore, you have to also keep in mind whatever it is that WorkSafe requires from a safety point of view, not only with respect to their regular regulations, but also with respect to what they have to say about COVID. Go ahead. So the question is, can we gather for council meetings or general meetings? So as part of the phase 1 openings, Strata council meetings and Strata corporation meetings are not deemed to be part of the permitted openings for formal meetings or gatherings. So if you quickly read their plan, it kind of sounds like you might be able to do a council meeting, but when you drill down and actually look at the provincial health order around gatherings and meetings, the only gatherings and meetings that you can have right now are some special exemptions, like municipal council meetings, for example, and weddings and baptisms. So beyond those, you can't. So your Strata council meetings, even though they are smaller, you can't, and we definitely can't have any of the general meetings yet. So as a result, we're still doing the virtual meetings. So virtual meetings are still best practice right now, and probably until we get changes around those numbers. And now with personal gatherings of up to 10 persons outside and 5 inside, they don't really include the business of Strata Corporation for council or general meetings. So we're moving in the direction of leaving the virtual space if you want to, but we're still not there yet. So we still have to continue that way. Okay. when formal meetings are permitted, there will still be requirements for social distancing, and you're still going to require a safety plan. So if we're following the Dr. Bonnie Henry's announcement around the 4 phases of the restart plan, you'll see that June 15th, things open up to include some gatherings of up to 15 people, but it does require 50 people, but it does require a published safety plan. And as we talked about that already, that includes social distancing, the requirement to wear a mask, contact tracing, and a sanitation plan. And keep in mind, again, when you actually start to drill down on what those requirements are in terms of social distancing, at this point in time, it's looking like you actually need to have seats for every person at the per se social distance or bigger space. So you're really looking at capacity issues, right? So if you're thinking about you think, oh yes, we can now have 50 people, think about what size of space you actually would need to put 49 people in the same room at the 6 feet social distancing requirements. It's quite a large room. So I think it's still going to be a bit more time before we get to the point that we're out of the virtual space, at least with respect to general meetings.
I was going to say the other side of that is the rule of thumb you can apply. So it really a room traditionally held 50 people when they were seated. Apply the rule of 15%. Maybe they really hold 8 people. It's not a matter of opening the doors and squashing 50 people in. If you have 50 people, you're almost looking at a hockey arena to be able to social distance sufficiently between the parties.
Yeah, so I don't know. I know for me, I had some problems with the audio there, so I'll just reiterate what Tony was saying in a abridged version, which was the rule of thumb for capacity is 15%. So if you are looking at having a room that normally fits 50 people, you're actually looking at 15% of that would allow for the proper social distancing. So that means only 8 people. So if you actually want to put in 50 people in a room, you need a way bigger, I'm not going to do the math, I can't remember the math, but a way bigger room. So that's why I said I think it's going to be still a while before we are able to host general meetings indoors and in person. Okay.
Even a medium-sized ballroom in the hotel will not be able to accommodate 50 people with social distancing.
Yeah, you're probably looking at like the giant ballroom at the Hotel Vancouver, maybe.
Or at the Trade and Convention Center,
yeah,
right?
or the Trade and Convention Center, yeah. So they're really big rooms. If you do the math backwards, like you're looking at, I think, a room that can take around, was it over 500 people to fit the 50 people.
Exactly.
Yeah, or around 500 people. So it's going to be a while. So Bill 11. So you may have heard that the ability to hold, so let me backtrack. The ability to hold electronic meetings normally would require a bylaw. The standard bylaw allows you to conduct electronic Strata Council meetings, but it doesn't specify anything with respect to general meetings. So when the pandemic hit, unless you happen to be one of those strata corporations that had a bylaw that allowed for electronic general meetings, you were kind of stuck. And so the government passed a ministerial order in April of last year that essentially opened up the door for strata corporations to hold electronic meetings without having a bylaw. And I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but the short version is that there was a cutoff date implemented, and that cutoff date was July 10th. So as of July 10th, if you didn't have a bylaw, you needed to get one in order to continue to have electronic meetings, general meetings. However, Bill 11, which hit third reading and was granted royal assent, I believe, last week, it now allows it extends that date. So it's no longer July 10th. So we don't have that panic anymore. We now have until December 21st of this year, sorry, 31st of this year, to continue our practice of having electronic meetings without having to have a specified bylaw that allows for the electronic meeting. And that applies to Strata Council meetings, hearings, and annual and special general meetings. So we can continue that. But keep in mind that, again, bylaws are required for you to do this. So if you want to be able to continue this practice beyond December 31st, now's the time to take a look at the bylaws and think about putting them in if you want to continue this practice beyond December 31st. Okay. So after June 15th, depending on what is specifically announced, we've got, we'll be able to hold annual general meetings in person after June 15th. Then it's possible to, the question is, if we are permitted to hold annual special general meetings in person after June 15th, is it possible to recommend people submit proxies to reduce attendance? If more than 50 people attend to register, can we impose the obligation of a proxy on those additional eligible voters? So in the last few months, a number of cases have come out of the CRT that have challenged general meetings that have been held during the pandemic and subsequent to the ministerial order that allowed for general meetings electronically. And the CRT, the Civil Resolution Tribunal, has found that you can't, essentially you can't hold a general meeting and just say, well, the first 50 people that show up can attend and everybody else has to submit a proxy. You can submit a proxy at the door. So you can't force people to not attend. If they want to attend in person, they need to be given that chance to attend in person. So that also means that while you can tell people, sure, if you submit proxies to reduce attendance, you can tell them that. You can't force them. You can't even, I don't think you can even strongly recommend them to do that. The reality is that we're continuing to hold the general meetings that we are holding now are meant to be just like the general meetings you hold in person. So all of the people that are allowed to come to a normal general meeting in person are permitted to come to a general meeting virtually. And it just means that the people who are holding and hosting and running these general meetings have to adapt our practices to facilitate that.
So Veronica, provided the chairperson of the meeting has an active communication terminal, a computer, it would also be possible to do both at the same time, would it not? You could have your in-person meeting and allow people to electronically, provided they can hear the proceedings of the meeting and be heard if they have any questions, motions, voting, etc. So it is technically possible to do both simultaneously.
Yeah, you can do both simultaneously. And in fact, I think, for example, we had, our firm had developed bylaws that essentially that's what electronic meetings for general meetings were meant to do. It wasn't, we never really envisioned it for a scenario where it would all be held virtually, but for scenarios where you might have a number of people who do attend virtually, and you just have to figure out a way to make sure that they can communicate with everybody else and can vote in the same way that everybody else can vote. But so there's nothing stopping you from holding it in person and having a meeting room that can accommodate whatever 10 people, and then everybody else who's attending in person is also attending from their units, for example. But that's very different than turning them away at the door and saying you have to submit a proxy to the people who are here first.
Right, right. So the latter is accommodating, the former is accommodating everyone.
Yeah.
But the latter is basically going to prejudice people's voting rights, which you want to avoid at any cost.
That's right. And their ability to communicate. That seems to be a really big issue. When you look at the ministerial order, when you look at with the CRT decisions, one of the key components is that people are able to communicate with each other. So the minute you've told somebody they can't attend in person, they're not really able to communicate and essentially debate and discuss the resolutions that are, and the, you know, or the budget if it's an annual general meeting that's put on the floor.
Right. Okay, so let's dive into facilities, which we know are the big bone of contention for everyone. So we have a CRT decision basically that determined that strata corporations can't close facilities without a 3/4 vote of the owners, but yet we also have orders that limit or close facilities such as gyms, pools, hot tubs, guest rooms, meeting rooms. And so we had this little conflict that went on. Some strata corporations, and this is going to answer a bunch of the questions that have been raised, a number of strata corporations have maintained their facilities such as gyms and pools on single use only. And so they've had a registration process, they've had a cleaning protocol, and it could only be single-use periods of 45 minutes with time in between so that they could ensure that there was no cross-transmission. So let's dive into really the big issue that I think a lot of people are online for is what do we do with our gyms and our recreation facilities?
So are you looking to me?
I'm looking to you.
Okay. Indoor gyms and recreational facilities that are single use are permitted, so you can still have them, you can still run them, but there has to be a safety plan in place. So that's the key. Again, you'll hear that come up again and again as we talk about anything that the Strata Corporation is running, is that, or facilitating, is that there has to be a safety plan. So what's recommended is a sanitation protocol along with sanitation stations for all users. The idea as well that you have some time in between users is required under the safety plan to prevent airborne spread of the virus. So remember, like when we started the pandemic, there was a lot of talk about how the virus was spread primarily by droplets. But now we know and we understand that it's not just by droplets, it is also by airborne transmission, which means that we now have to really think about not just you know, having a mask on, because that is one layer of protection, but also thinking about spacing and the time you spend in a shared space with people. Okay, so the common facility is a responsibility of the Strata Corporation. So I know that some Strata corporations want to leave it to the users to self-police with respect to COVID and whatever the safety protocols are. But the reality is that while it is owned by all of the owners in proportion to unit entitlement, the Strata Property Act makes the common area facilities the responsibility of the Strata Corporation to manage. So you know, that's why it's not a free-for-all, right? That's why Strata Corporation has rules about the hours that they're open and how to book those facilities and what you can and can't do in those facilities. So similarly, that extends to ensuring that the space is a safe space and a space that complies with all of the health orders. So one of the big questions is, you know, can we just leave the facility unmonitored or do we need somebody there 24/7? And so a user system that isn't monitored or regulated through a safety plan does not meet the provincial requirements for opening. We have talked to health authorities, and the various health authorities all are a little bit different. So I think it's important that you talk to your specific health authority with respect to your amenity system. But something that essentially leaves it as a free-for-all isn't going to be good. I know that there have been some Strata corporations in some health authorities where it's been fine as long as you have people periodically coming to check in, sort of spot checks every few hours, so whether that be your concierge or your caretaker or your janitorial staff. There are some that have a system where you have the fobs are locked off for everybody except for the people that pre-book. That might that might work with some monitoring. So again, you really have to take a look at your specific facility. You have to take a look at, what all of the things we talked about in terms of capacity, the sanitation, and how people are going to be coming in and using the space, and making sure that there is some checks and balances to ensure that only those people that are supposed to be there are actually using it.
I think it's also important that the safety plan is printed, published, and posted on the door of the facility. So when somebody's coming to the facility, it's perfectly clear what the expectations of the users are, but the users will also have an understanding of what protocols for cleaning and sanitation are being applied to the facility. Communication is a huge part of this implementation. And the safety plan it will help the Strata Council and the corporation understand what's actually happening in the facility. If they actually print it off, stick it on the door of their facility, it makes a huge difference. Guest suites. So here's the other side. And one of the challenges that's come up with guest suites is several Strata corporations have been asked if the guest suites can be used for out-of-town visitors or people who've been traveling from outside the country.
Right. And that's not a problem at all.
No, no, there's been no transmission or any kind of issues that have been related to that, right? So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, guest suites, of course, like the pool and other amenities, they can be made available. You have to have a safety plan. A published safety plan is something that's required, and one if somebody requests a copy of it as well. And you've got to think about all those things again about capacity, and you've got to think about all those things like the cleaning and what happened, how much time in between guests, and who's going to do that, and how that's going to be accomplished in a WorkSafe compliant sort of way as well. But the other thing you have to think about as well is remembering as a Strata corporation, the Strata corporation is responsible for managing it. And so you should be verifying before that guest suite is rented out whether the guest suite is going to be used in a way that complies with the public health orders, which currently means you can't have anybody traveling outside of somebody who's from outside of the zone. So you're not, somebody, if you live in the Okanagan, they shouldn't be somebody that's coming in from the lower mainland. And if you're traveling from out of the country, that's also problematic given what's required as well. So really think about what the public health orders are and ensuring that the guests are compliant with those public health orders.
One of the questions that was emailed in earlier applies to this too. It's for Strata corporations who share a clubhouse that has a pool, a gym, and 4 guest suites. And so the 4 Strata corporations can't seem to agree upon what the use and protocols of these facilities are, but yet they have a covenant that they have to share the facilities. And I would suspect until they can create a safety plan and agree on how it's going to be jointly administered, they probably can't open their facilities.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, that's you have to have a safety plan. So if they can't agree, then there is no safety plan. So you're done. You're done right from the get-go. I mean, ideally, if you can't agree, if you want to actually run it, you should at least go with the minimum one. Sorry, the one that is the one where the Strata corporation that requires the most yes. in terms of protocols. That's the one, because at least you can agree that at least those protocols have to be followed, right? But if you can't come to an agreement at all, I don't see how you can run them and still be compliant.
And again, the objective is not about regulation. The objective is safety for everyone associated in these communities. So pools, here we go with the opening of pools and the collective use of pools, pool deck areas, and an important reminder for Strata corporations of any Strata corporation greater than 4 units. Your pool is regulated as a commercial pool under the Pool Regulation Act of BC.
Yeah, and actually, I think if nothing else, this pandemic has really helped to reiterate that. I think there's been a lot of Strata corporations that don't necessarily realize that they're regulated by the Pool Regulation Act of BC. And so I think that was one of those things that came out as a bit of a surprise and a bit of a learning as a result of the pandemic. So at this time, there isn't really any provision or limit for the opening of pools, but that doesn't mean that it's a free-for-all. It just means that you have to follow safety plans and have think about all of the things that are required with respect to the areas outside of the pool, right? That's you've got change areas, you might have washrooms, you might have, you're thinking about ventilation, you're thinking about, all the touch points of sanitation, contact tracing as well, because they're entering that space that you're managing. And all of that's going to continue to be required until the provincial health orders say they're not. So it's still important to have that safety plan and have all of the protocols necessary to make sure that you meet the provincial health order.
The other thing that comes up is a lot of pool areas have social terraces on them with chairs and seating and lounges and stuff, and social distancing will still be required even though it's outside. And that probably means the removal of 50% or more of your seating areas just to be able to accommodate the social distancing.
Yeah.
So facility management, I'm going to jump in here because we've been doing a fair amount of work on this front. And the more difficult part about COVID and the variants is how highly airborne the transmission is. And fresh air and management in ventilation is really more than ever so critical in building operations. So for buildings who are shutting down their makeup air systems at night to try and save energy, this is not the time in history to be doing it. Your makeup air units, especially if you have an underground parking garage, are mandatory and required to be running 24 hours a day. They should be run at full operational systems 24 hours a day. And this includes things like common area heat pumps that are administering cooling or heating to common areas, rooftop makeup air units and air conditioners, and filters need to be replaced routinely. One of the great benefits of multifamily buildings in British Columbia, especially in the condos, is that the makeup air systems, for the most part, are 100% new air that is constantly introduced into the building and then flows out through buildings. It's not recycled air. So we actually have one of the better benefits in the sense that we are continuously getting fresh air in our systems. But the fresh air only works if our systems are operational and they're efficient and they're running 24 hours a day. So, we can't overemphasize the risks of the virus and how airborne the virus actually is, and the absolute necessity to make sure ventilation is happening. When we get to the next stage to allow for interior gatherings of up to 50 people, it's going to be essential that ventilation is one of the significant focuses as well. So that, open windows during meetings will become essential and ongoing air recirculation will be essential. We have a lot of service work and inspection work that has to continue in buildings. You can't avoid your fire protection and safety operations. High-rise buildings, we have to do stack lines and need to be cleaned constantly. It requires access to strata lots, and it may require interaction with the occupants. The simple fire safety protection to inspect your smoke alarms and heat alarms might only take 10 minutes in each unit, but what's the safety protocol? Everybody's required to wear a mask. Is there a sanitation requirement? Have you addressed ventilation requirements? Will the owner leave their unit while the technician is in the unit, or can they stay? Do you have sanitary gel so for hand sanitizers for everyone who comes in contact with the station? The duration of the service work is really going to affect the impact on units and occupants. I think this is even more so when we start looking at things like insurance claims for restoration or emergencies, as there's prolonged access to strata lots that's needed. So, continued maintenance and inspections are absolutely necessary. Access to strata lots is going to be necessary. But, before you do this, ask yourself, what's your safety plan to administer the service work? How are each of the contact issues, the ventilation issues? Are there social distancing issues? Are there individuals who are in isolation of strata lots that you won't be able to access? Remember, WorkSafe regulations will apply to the contractors and employees who are entering those units. Are you maintaining a record? This is very important, of each strata lot that was entered as you go through. And the other real benefit, which owners themselves can do before a service technician comes in, is open doors and windows to increase ventilation, because the makeup air in the buildings, if you have a common hallways and a makeup air unit, will increase the air circulation and the airflow through the units to the outside. Stack flushing and sanitary systems. This is something that routinely has to happen. 3 years is usually the outset for high-rise buildings. It's the only way to prevent sewer backups in buildings. But there are also risks with stack cleaning with respects to the back sewage up or aspiration within units with respects to the cleaning of the systems. So as this goes through, ventilation proximity to drains and the duration of exposure needs to be addressed for the safety of the occupants and the service workers. So you have to increase ventilation. It may be even more important for individuals to not be in their units for half an hour once the stack flushing is complete, to basically allow the airborne viruses to either drop or to be transmitted out through some sort of ventilation service. But look closely at what the protocols are going to be. And before you do stack flushing, you have to notify the occupants in the building. They need to know the time of the scheduled work. They need to be aware of what the safety plan is, what the ventilation protocols are going to be, and the duration of time that this may affect their units, so they can leave the units in the event that it may pose a risk for them. Remember, not everyone has been vaccinated. We're still away from a full cycle of vaccinations, and this affects young people, children, in as much as everyone else who lives in these buildings. So we have to look at a really holistic approach to managing all of these issues. So insurance claims and emergencies, do you want me to keep going, Veronica? You want to pile in, or you? So, so an insurance claim or emergency, it's going to be basically the same thing as maintenance in the building. It's really about, what's the duration of the restoration? What was the damage? If it's a water stain on a ceiling that's going to require a painter to come in at some point, the protocols are not going to be that significant. But if it was a sewer backup or a flood where the drywall has to be removed and the flooring has to be replaced, this is going to be very invasive. So both from the WorkSafe regulations and your safety plan, how is this going to be managed? How is it going to be managed for the safety of the workers and the restoration parties? How is it going to be managed for the occupants who are living in the unit at the same time? More important, also make a record of every strata lot that was entered, which ones were affected, what your safety protocols were. And then of course, the last item is, were there any environmental or hazardous impact? And it's not only sewer backup. If you're in older buildings and the drywall is being removed, we're also talking about asbestos removal and abatement, in addition to COVID, in addition to all the regulations. So, it could take a little bit of time right now, and the protocols could be significant as we move forward. Just because the province is implementing the restart plan does not eliminate all of these protocols. These protocols are going to stay in place through each phase of the province's implementation plan. Masks. So here we come to the whole issue of masks. Do we have to keep wearing masks, and what the expectation is? So what do you think, Veronica?
Yeah, okay, so what you still have to wear masks. I mean, in my mind, if you have to wear masks anywhere else, you should continue to wear masks as required indoors, in those hallways, in those lobbies, particularly in elevators. You're in close quarters with people, laundry rooms, club rooms, facilities, the garbage and recycling, the parking areas, all of those public spaces where you're indoors. We know from the messaging from public health that that's where the risk of transmission is highest, indoors, particularly if we aren't able to social distance. So yeah, continue the mask protocols should continue until, at the very least, the public health officer says that you no longer need them. And again, keeping in mind what Tony just mentioned, not everybody is vaccinated. We haven't reached those levels of herd immunity yet. We're only just at the tip of starting the second rounds of vaccinations to the general population. So it's I think we're still a little bit ways off before we can feel free to unmask in those indoor spaces. Yeah, so the idea here is about still maintaining a lot of those protocols that most of you will have already implemented, which is the sanitation stations through the common areas, making sure that you have reduced capacity with respect to the elevators, so 2 people or 1 family at a time to reduce risk. And just reminding people again that social distancing in common areas wherever possible is important. We've got the BCCDC has lots of posters that you can put up and that many of you have put up in your common property spaces to remind people of social distancing, the importance of masking, and the importance of sanitation during this time.
Yeah, don't let your guard down at this point, right? Like, we're going to be able to gather more, we're going to be more social, we're going to be able to do more events, but keep the guard up on risk management. Hopefully it's not going to be that much longer before we can start to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And government's already talking about on the horizon the time period where we don't have to wear masks anymore. But in enclosed areas, it's still a huge impact. Really good question about vaccinations, though, and this is kind of an appropriate time to ask it, is can the Strata Corporation screen the users of gyms and pools based on their vaccination status? And so, so here's a good question, because A, they're asking for personal medical information, and B, they would then be creating different classes of persons for use of common facilities. Yeah. So it's complicated.
It totally is. And then there's people who are legitimately exempt from being able to take the vaccinations, and who's judging that, and how are you managing that? I mean, I don't think where Strata corporations are in a position to collect that medical information, at least not unless we have some changes in legislation that would allow for that. I think the privacy commissioner would consider that to be an overreach of what the Strata Corporation needs with respect to personal information in order to manage the Strata Corporation. But that essentially tells you, though, if you are at all considering whether vaccination, essentially like the equivalent of a vaccination passport to use your common facilities, it means we're not there yet in being able to open those facilities without a safety plan. So what you need is a safety plan, not the ability to allow people only those that have been vaccinated to use those facilities.
So we don't have the official announcement of June 15th yet, but we do have the announcement this morning from government that June 15th implementation is going ahead. And so it basically is going to be 2 parts. One is about gatherings, but the other part really is about businesses and operations, and employees can return to work. So, there is, but again, look at the checklist here. It's no different than for Strata corporations, and Strata council meetings will be permitted as part of the, return back to work cycle, but you still need to be recognizing WorkSafe procedures. Staff still need to be trained on the protocols. We still need checklists and reports of the activities that are being completed. Safety plan, again, renamed, it's here again. Small in-person meetings are permitted, and I guess that would mean a client can come to your office. But again, that would mean a boardroom with social distancing, with, again, meeting safety plan requirements. And with the safety plan, formal meetings like Strata Council meetings will be permitted if there is social distancing and a safety plan. So it all really comes down to, responsible activity here.
Yeah, that's right. That safety plan, like all of the measures don't disappear. We'll just be allowed to do some extra things with specific measures still in place.
So, and here's the other side, gatherings and meetings.
Yeah, so you've got up to 50 people gathered outside for barbecues, family gatherings. So you could have exterior social Strata Corporation meetings, possible with social distancing and a safety plan. And again, if they follow what they did with the first phase, that essentially means a seated social safety plan. So again, not standing up in the parkade, but rather chairs for everybody, that where people stay seated in their chairs through the meeting, and that those chairs are are socially distant apart. Again, interior meetings will be possible with a safety plan, seating and social distancing, and facility use will be possible with a safety plan. So the idea is, again, safety plan. I feel like we've said safety plan a million times today, but the key is the safety plan. And CHOA will continue to monitor daily for updates, so that will be published on their website.
So I think we're just about at the question period, and I'll just flip through some of the questions here, but we've covered pretty much all of the questions that have been raised, because almost all of them deal with common facilities and cleaning. You know, we'll continue to post updates on the CHOA website. Definitely monitor the BC government website and the BC Centre for Disease Control, and we'll continue to provide all the links for everybody as we go through on this. So I'm just going to do a quick boo, but as I was looking through the questions, it looks like we've answered pretty much all of the questions that are here. The one question that keeps coming up, though, is, are masks mandatory or recommended? And they were never imposed for strata corporations as a mandatory requirement. They were always recommended. I'm not sure why that was. But again, I think that as we go through this and as part of the safety plan, I think that masks are still one of the, you know, more viable protections for everyone.
Yeah, and in fact, actually, there was a lot of confusion at first when the mask mandate came out, because what was published on the website suggested that strata corporations were mandatory, and then quickly disappeared and became a strongly recommended, not unlike what it was for travel for the longest time. And in my mind, while that means that means that the it is not an offense under the public health order to not have masks in strata corporations, I don't think really this is about whether people are offside the law. With strong recommendations, we're thinking about people's safety, and where we haven't really kicked this and we don't know who's vaccinated, and where people will be increasing their social contacts with people. Like, people are going to be seeing other people, and that is like increases the risk of exposure. So even if you were a strata corporation that weren't so big on the masks indoors, it probably makes a lot of sense to actually start ensuring that those masks are used indoors, at least until we get the clear from the public health officer.
Exactly. Just looking at the questions, there's one common thread there that that has come up, and it's a really, really good question. And the question is, where do we send the safety plan? And we don't. The safety plan is for the purpose of disclosure of the strata corporation that they actually are administering the requirements correctly, and they're disclosing it to their occupants, their owners, their tenants, their visitors. If there's access to the gym, access to the pool, common room access, what is your safety plan? And your safety plan is essentially, how are you administering the space? Just to go back and repeat that. What are your cleaning cycles, your janitorial? Do you have social distancing? Who can use the facility? Do we have space and time in between users so that we can eliminate the risk of airborne transmissions? How is the facility being used? Who is entitled to use the facility? So, we may have a gym, but the gym is used for residents only, not for visitors, not for owners who are not occupants. It is residents only. So we have contact tracing, we have a variety of issues. So the safety plan is a document of the Strata Corporation that they publish, and it's available to those persons in the building who are occupants or owners who are wanting to access that information. No one is going to police this. But in the event that there is an outbreak in your building or there is a problem, you may find that your regional medical health officer or health officer may ask for your safety plan. They may be asking for contact tracing and information. So it's in your best interest as a Strata Corporation. And the other benefit is it really helps you as a Strata Corporation to consciously think about how we are administering our spaces safely. And that's the intent here. How are we safely protecting all of our residents with respects to the potential transmission, opening up our facilities, but at the same time, using some safety protocols that protect everyone is really probably the most responsible anything else that the Strata Corporation can do. Veronica, do you have any other comments?
No, I think you captured it. Really, it is about thinking about safety and ensuring that we still keep that top of mind so that we are able to continue to open up at the pace that is projected, so that we can all begin to resume normal lives in the not too distant future.
Well, won't it be nice to be able to sit across a table from someone we've worked with for years and actually have a real conversation? Like this is lovely, but you know, I miss seeing real people.
No, it's true. I mean, we are at reduced capacity, for example, in our offices, but we're not allowed to meet with each other. It's kind of funny. Like we used to have lots of internal meetings, but I can't sit and meet with people.
Yeah, that's the ongoing challenge. Well, thanks so much. We're at our time limit, and I think we've pretty much covered almost all of the questions that have come up as we've come across. One more question, and this is not really about COVID specifically, but it does have an impact. The Strata Corporation wants to know, can we have an off-site general meeting if we can find a location that can accommodate us and meet our safety plan and numbers? And the answer is simple, of course. Strata corporations have been doing this forever. You know, they meet in hotels and community centers and church basements. If you can find a facility that can accommodate your numbers, that you can meet a safety plan, that, you know, that everyone is socially distanced, you know, it's certainly beneficial for the Strata Corporation to do it. The other thing to remember, though, is you know, as we're talking about this, social distancing is one part of this element, but if we're actually having an in-person meeting in a facility and we're using ballots and other types of communication, we also have to be conscious about how those ballots are handled, who's handling them. Is there a safety plan to reduce transmission with respect to the parties? You know, just put some conscious thought to that so that everyone, the scrutineers, you know, will the scrutineers be given hand sanitizers and rubber gloves, and are they wearing masks? And, you know, is there protection for the people who are acting as scrutineers as well? You know, just think about the registration process. You know, is someone standing at a desk right in front of you, 1 foot away, or are they actually socially distanced at 6 feet away? Excuse me.
And everybody else in line as well behind, right?
Exactly. Everyone else in line behind needs to be social distance as you're going through it. And they're going to be in possibly in an enclosed hallway that has poor ventilation. Right? Like, what's the impact? You know, the mechanics of how these meetings move are really going to be critical and important. So, you know, just give some thought. This is part of your safety plan. How are we managing people in our buildings so that everyone is safe? Just continually ask that question as you go through the development of your safety plan. So thanks again to BMS Plumbing and Mechanical. Everybody's welcome to email us questions if there was something that didn't quite get covered for you. Veronica, thanks so much, as always. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Our next session is on June 22nd, and you're back doing that as well with Adrian, and we're going to be doing council elections, how councils are elected, and we're going to be doing, I can't remember what the other part is, proxies. Proxies and managing proxies at general meetings, and, you know, getting back to just the normal routine general proxies so that business as normal is conducted. So June 22nd will be a great event as well. So thanks so much, and thanks everyone for joining us today.